Get my 6. What's up, everybody? So it's the end of August as of this recording, and this evening it's like we have low humidity. It's not that hot. It's almost starting to feel like fall. Can you believe that we're only 2 months away roughly from Halloween? It's almost time to start reading October Nights again, isn't it? Whew. Got a bunch of those in stock. Make sure you get them before October so you can follow through. Short story for every day of the month of October, building up to Halloween for the best, creepiest story of all. Now, this story today is a true story. This is a true story of sheer lunacy. Sheer lunacy. I'm going to share a story with you today that is a true story, really happened. One of many stories that made this novel, The Lunatic, it had to be written because there's so many lunatics. These people are out there everywhere. We got a new batch of those in just yesterday, so if you missed out on the last one of getting your autographed print copy, go to our Etsy store. The link is in the description box below, and you can get it. But this story has to do with malunggay. That's what we call it in the Philippines. Malunggay. Here in the U.S., they call it moringa. This is a tropical plant. It grows on a tree. For those of you who read Isle of Capri, you will remember there's a scene in the story where the main character gets bitten by the duwende, the magical Filipino dwarf, and they use this to treat the wound. That's kind of based on something that really happened when we lived in the Philippines. It's an amazing plant. Oh, and if you haven't read it, we got print copies of these too. Get that, okay? But this is an amazing plant. It's edible. It's medicinal. Dearly, when we lived in the Philippines, and we had massive access to this because it grows everywhere like a weed, and we would grow it in our yard. You chop one down, 5 come up, kind of like a tree of heaven. So they propagate very easily. You can pluck the leaves off, put them in soup, like Dearly likes to make pork rib soup. You can eat them raw. I mean, you can taste them. They're not like, they don't explode with flavor. But they're very healthy. They lower, it lowers blood pressure, all kinds of stuff. So, but also, like if you get cut, you can bundle it up together and squeeze the juice out of it into the cut, and it works as a disinfectant and anti-inflammatory, and somehow it stops the bleeding. It like helps the blood coagulate, and it just stops bleeding. It's amazing. So here's the story about malunggay or moringa that highlights the lunacy that we see in our society, okay? So a couple of years ago, we'd been in the U.S., I guess, 3 years at the time, and Dearly kept saying she wanted a malunggay tree. So I said, all right, find one. We'll go get it. Find one for sale. And she found a Filipino lady, actually, who lives about an hour and a half north of us, who was selling these trees. She grows them and propagates them. And they were like $15 or maybe $30 each. I don't know. But we bought 2. We gave one to one of our friends, and then we kept the other. And you're probably thinking, well, wow, a mile and a half or an hour and a half drive to get a tree that costs $15 or $30. I get it, because when we lived in the Philippines, we once drove a motorcycle. We had a little moped, like a 125cc moped. Daniel was about 2.5 years old. I hadn't eaten pizza in like 3 months. We were living out in the middle of the jungle. There was no Western food anywhere. And we had a decent month, 1 month with the writing and everything. And we made enough money to where we could go get pizza. So we rode a motorcycle, me, Dearly, and Daniel in the middle, 3 hours one way to get pizza. And no, we didn't have helmets on because we were in Rome doing as the Romans. You rarely see helmets. I mean, some people wear them, but inside the city limits, a lot of times it's law. But we lived in the provinces, which is like out in the country. So I know what it's like to be away from home and wanting something just small that can make you feel at home. And so I understood Dearly's, I could empathize with her because I mean, what's an hour and a half for a tree? Excuse me, if you're willing to drive a motorcycle, 3 hours one way for a pizza, right? So we go up, we meet this woman, and guys, again, here's my preface. I can only control what I say. I can't control how you take what I say. This story is true. These things happened. These words were spoken. Okay? So we go to the woman's house, knock on the door. She greets us. And I speak to her in Visayan, and she's shocked. And I tell her, well, I lived over there for 6 years. And it turns out this woman is from the same city I lived in, and same city Dearly was born in. So I thought, this is great, right off the bat. This woman, Filipino lady, she was probably 55-ish. Yeah, close to 60, not quite. So I thought, oh, this is great to meet somebody. You know, I lived in her city for 6 years. Well, when we weren't in the provinces. So we're really going to hit it off here. We're really going to relate. And this woman, she knew we were coming because we'd made arrangements online to come up and get these trees. She knew Dearly, of course, is a Filipina. So she cooked spaghetti for us, and it was wonderful because it was Filipino spaghetti. And what that means, for those of you who don't know what that means, is they put hot dogs in it. It's crazy, but they'll chop up hot dogs, put it in the spaghetti. Sounds odd, but it's great. It's delicious. And the sauce, they use banana sauce instead of tomato-based sauce, and it's a little bit sweeter. I love it, okay? So we're up there, we're eating spaghetti and all this stuff. And I was noticed, like, we're in her dining room, and there's like, I just hear noise. I look over, and there's this big, like 72-inch LED, big flat screen TV on the wall, and it's like playing mainstream media, some kind of news. I didn't know what channel. I don't know what channel. It's just playing news. And I have hearing issues. I have tinnitus from the war in Iraq. I have a constant humming in my ears. I've lost my ability to hear higher pitches that I used to be able to hear, but I've gained an ability to hear lower pitches. It's really neat because we'll be waiting for the school bus in the morning, or maybe Dearly and I will be down there waiting for the school bus in the afternoon to bring Daniel home. I can hear the school bus for like a full 30 seconds before Dearly and Daniel, because of that low hum. It's making its way around the mountains like a couple miles away. I can hear it for about 30 seconds before they can begin to hear it. But if it's a higher pitch, I can't hear it at all. But when there's background noise being played, like if somebody has a TV on, or like if I'm in a store or a restaurant and there's background music being played, I can't hear the conversation that people are having with me. It like neutralizes out their words. So I asked this lady if she would turn it down, please. And so she did. She turned it down. I can still hear, but I can still hear the conversation. So we're having dinner, and she holds up a picture. She just holds up a picture. And she goes, "This is my husband, by the way." And I looked at it, and I said, "Well, he's a good-looking guy. You got good taste in men, at least by physical appearance. He's a good-looking guy. You're a lucky woman." And she goes, "He's black." And I was like, "Well, yeah, I can see that. He's a good-looking guy." And she goes, "He's from Somalia." I said, "Wow, that's cool." And she's like, "Why is that cool?" Like, defensive. And I was like, "What's going on here?" I says, "Well, think about it. Okay," and she had been in the U.S. for, I think, maybe 10 years. I said, "You migrated here from another country, from Southeast Asia. Your husband migrated here from Africa, another country in Africa. That's got to be really neat to be like two different people from two completely different cultures and countries meeting in a completely different country with a completely different culture that's not home for either of you, and like getting to go on that journey together." That just strikes me as something that would be very interesting. Like the comparison and the contrasting of, well, we do it this way in the U.S. How might you do it differently in the Philippines? How might your husband have done it differently in Somalia? And she's like, "Oh, yeah, okay." And she's getting it, and she's following along. So we keep going. We keep eating the spaghetti. And she's talking to Dearly in Visayan, and I'm jumping right in there. And I'm speaking to her in Visayan too. And she was getting a kick out of that. But then about another 5 minutes or so go by, and she goes, "I got to ask you a question." I was like, "Okay." It's almost like she had some sort of like multiple personalities or something. She seemed like a really sweet lady, and we were really, getting along and focusing on our commonalities, you know, all the things we had in common, which is what commonalities mean. But she says to me, she goes, if you hate immigrants so much, why did you marry one? I was like, what? I'd never, ever been asked that question in my life. And I said, I don't hate anybody. And she's looking at me like, and I'm thinking, where's this coming from? Then I remembered the TV playing the garbage on the wall. And I remembered also that when we first came into the house, there was another TV playing garbage on the wall in the living room. So I turned my head, I saw that one. I looked back, I turned my head, I saw the one over there, and I thought, oh my God, this woman, it's like she may as well have an IV hooked up to her brain and just have the other end of the tube going into this headline garbage that's pumping her head full of this crap that is not true. So I said to her, I said, listen, and I can't remember her name, but I called her by her name. Listen, you need to turn this crap off. You need to stop watching this crap. This stuff's getting to you. And she looked over and she saw it, and it's almost like she thought for a minute. Then we just kept eating our spaghetti. So after we're finished eating, we go out into her backyard. This is where she had her trees, and she was propagating many trees. She had a beautiful house. Her and her husband had a beautiful house. It was in a subdivision. Had a decent sized lot, maybe quarter of an acre, which for, you know, one of those cookie cutter subdivisions where all the houses look the same, like in Poltergeist. And that's what they remind me of. That's why I can't live there, among other things, like annoying neighbors, busybodies, coming over to see how you're doing because they want to know what you're doing. Been there, done that. No, sir, no, ma'am. So anyway, she had a nice little yard and she had fence up, so she had privacy. We're looking at all the trees she propagated, and I'm like, oh, wow, look, pointing out to my wife, look, honey, here's a, you know, yellow tulip poplar. Here's an autumn blaze maple. Oh, look, she has, you know, some hickory trees. And the woman's like, wow, you really know your trees. And I said, well, yeah, it's kind of like our thing. I said, we've got 6 acres right outside of Charlottesville, and we've planted literally thousands of trees. And so we've learned. And she's like, oh my God, you've got 6 acres outside of Charlottesville? I'm like, yeah. And she goes, could you afford that? Is that your inheritance? I was like, no. She's like, well, how did you get it? I said, I bought it. And she's like, oh, with money you inherited. I was like, no, with money that I earned from working the same way you probably bought your house. And she goes, I don't believe you. And I'm like, what in the hell is this about? What's going on here? So, we got the tree, got the Malungai tree, and we got in the car, and we're coming home. And I think what she was alluding to was this concept of privilege. And I remembered the TVs and the IV tube, which is obviously in her brain, and all this stuff's being pumped. And I'm not going to say that stuff doesn't exist, because it does. And I recognize to a great degree much of mine, probably not all of it. But as far as money goes, I never have, nor will I ever inherit a penny. Trust me, I know. And I don't care, because I know how to make my own. I don't need it. You know what Warren Buffett calls inheritances? Welfare for the rich. And, you know, as I've gone on in life and as I've gotten up there in years, I can kind of see his point. Let me illustrate. I know trust babies. A lot of trust babies around here where I live. Most of them that I know personally are wonderful people. They're humble. They're the salt of the earth. If you didn't know who they were, if you didn't know who their families were, you would never... Man, wow, I just talked to a guy that's net worth is about $40 million. You know, he gets, you know, $180,000 a year paid out from the dividends of the big company his great-great-grandfather founded, and then the trust pays him this much, you know, making, you know, $500,000 a year in trust funds, never touching his principal. You'd never know it, because these people, the ones I know, they're the salt of the earth. They're humble, and most of them work. They either work or they volunteer. They volunteer at their kids' schools. These are real people I know. Or they'll volunteer at the SPCA because they want to be a productive member of their community, and they want to contribute to their community and to their society. So this idea of, you know, being born into wealth, oh, that must be great. You just sit around and day drink all the time and take these lavish trips. I don't see that often, but I do know a few that are like that. I do know a few. I do see some of it around here. So here's my point. What's the difference between the guy that sits around drinking and or drugging all day, that doesn't contribute, but he can afford to do it, or say a woman, she can afford to do it because she was born into wealth, versus somebody who was born into poverty, who gets a lot of entitlements, a lot of, help from the government, and doesn't really do anything to contribute to society because they sit around and drink and drug all day. What's the difference between those two people? In my mind, basically just where the money comes from. This person gets it from the government. This person gets it from a trust fund. But they're both equally not contributing to society or their community. You know what I mean? So why is it the grasshopper should be able to judge the ant? I was born into wealth, so it's okay for me to be a deadbeat. But that guy, he was born into poverty, he's a deadbeat. Why, he's a burden on his tax system. Whatever, dude. Warren Buffett says that inheritance is welfare for the rich. So I just wanted to share that. But I think, I used to think that this woman's issue, who sized me up and judged me up and wanted to call me things I wasn't and claim that I did things I don't. And again, what do they say? Every time you point the finger at somebody, you got 3 pointing back at yourself. She thought since she was on a certain side of the political aisle, it was perfectly okay for her to do it, and there was nothing insane about it. It's sheer lunacy. Sheer lunacy. Well, we've got to stop. We've got to stop listening to what the agenda is telling us as far as the narrative is. We got to get out there and mix and mingle around with not our next door neighbors. I always like to make sure to keep a distance here because I don't want nobody too close to me knowing too much about me and coming and going. Because if I'm out here working, if I'm right here making my YouTube video for the day, I don't want some dude coming over asking me, how's it going? Okay, but outside of that, like, my kids' school, his friends' parents, his activities, my activities, Dearly's activities, we participate in quite a bit. We don't talk about it a lot on here because we don't want people just showing up at some of these places we go. But we've got to get out there and we've got to meet people who are different than us, maybe come from different places, maybe have different viewpoints, different ideas. But we cannot believe that because we see how they look physically, the color of their skin, their nationality, we can't think they're anything based upon any of that because those are so superficial traits. We know nothing about that person except, okay, I see the lady. Oh, she's from the Philippines. I knew that she's Filipina. Past that point, I knew nothing, but I got to know a little bit about her as I spent time with her. I don't want to say she's a bad person, but she's got some lunatic ideas in her head. I think they've been put there by mainstream media. I hope she took my advice and unplugged, but I don't know. I know how my story ends. On the way home, I looked over at my wife. I said, I don't want us to have anything to do with that woman ever again. And my wife said, don't worry, we won't. That's where it ended with us because she's toxic. I mean, just to make these assumptions and these accusations, that's not a political issue. That's just an issue of being toxic. And I don't like to hang out with toxic people. And I don't. But I hope her story ended better. I hope she unplugged from the lunacy of mainstream media. And it's both sides. It's not just the side she was watching. You watch the other side. They just make you hate a different type of person you'll probably never meet in your life anyway. Make you angry about all kinds of things you don't really understand anyway. Both of them do that. Just stop. Unplug. Read a good book. And if you get it from Etsy, you can get it with this guy's autograph in it. Okay? And that's it. That's all I have for you today. I'm going to go spend the next couple of hours before it gets dark with my family outside in this beautiful weather. It's not too hot. It's not humid. Thank you for being here for another episode of whatever the hell this channel's about. Catch you for more next time.